Joining me now on set is Sami Hamdi. He's the editor of Middle East politics website International Interest. Thank you very much for joining us here, Sami. So all this week we've looked back at 15 years before and 15 years today. How is Iraq, and about the divisions, about the sectarian conflict. But another point we have to talk about is the damage of infrastructure.
I think the damage of infrastructure damage has been immense. I think when we're talking about not just the US airstrikes, but also the US war on Al-Qaeda, US attempts to contain some of the Iran-backed militias, the fighting that took place between Muqtada Sadr and Maliki in 2006, that took place within the city of Baghdad itself, that demolished. We're talking about the transport links that have been demolished, all in the name of the war on ISIS, on Daesh, and all of these other various different conflicts that have taken place. Also, the inability of the government to actually do something about it. The government has been mired in constant political divisions that have spread across the state institutions. So, for example, Interior Minister in Iraq, it is said to belong to a certain militia or a certain party. The Defense Ministry belongs to the Sunnis and it belongs to the US, for example, this ministry, and so on and so forth. So even when you're tendering contracts and even when businesses are winning these contracts, they can't implement them without the permission of a certain militia or the permission of a certain member within those particular institutions. So I think it's a whole range of different factors, and I think genuinely, even when we're looking at Iraq today and we're looking at the immense damage that's been taking place, there's no genuine desire to rebuild it either. If we're looking at this Kuwait conference that took place, which is supposed to bring all of this investment, ironic considering Kuwait, according to many people, provoked Iraq, provoked Saddam into the Gulf War.
Which happened this year, by the way, didn't it? The Kuwait
Which happened this year,
yeah.
The Kuwait conference, in terms of rebuilding investment. But when you look at Iraq today, you see militias roaming around with impunity that the government can't do anything about them. The government wants to include them into the army. You had at one point in the Iraqi government a deputy of a militia as interior minister. When you have all of these different powers moving along, when you're tendering a contract, let's suppose Abadi tomorrow, the Prime Minister, says, we want to tender a contract for a highway between Baghdad and Mosul, for example, to rebuild. Who do you give the contract to? Not only that, does Iraq have the money to pay? From 2003 to 2009, the government fell into arrears. It couldn't pay these US companies, UK companies, French companies that came in and ate the cake and tried to rebuild everything. The Iraqi government fell into arrears and couldn't pay these companies. Projects started stalling. And then when the US government started pumping money into the Iraqi government, that money fell into the hands of militias, who used that money to fund their soldiers, to fund their weapons in order to cement their control. So when we're talking about rebuilding Iraq, you cannot rebuild Iraq unless there is genuine political reconciliation and sectarian reconciliation between the Shia population, who are divided amongst themselves in terms of the militias, between the Sunni populations, which make up the regions where ISIS, where Daesh had their enclaves, where they took advantage of the grievances of these people, and the Kurds to the north, in which Abadi marched the Iraqi army when Barzani tried to declare independence, and with US standing by, the Kurds, their independence dream was crushed.
So we're talking about 15 years of war, and to rebuild, you're making it sound it's impossible. But so to rebuild a country at this point, which is divided, as you mentioned, the sectarian conflict by the side, and you have the Kurdish region. So when you look at it, do you need someone else to get involved in the picture, like the UN?
If we're talking about from a very crude realpolitik way, the easiest region to rebuild will be the Shia regions in the south and in the southeast. Why? Because they are the most organized. They are the most, you could say, somewhat united as a result. In terms of the other areas where, for example, Daesh were prominent, in terms of those Sunni areas in the west, towards the northwest and the like, those are much harder. One, because geographically they're much wider and they're much bigger and they're much more sparse. Secondly, the people do not necessarily trust the government, so they're more likely to accept anybody who's going to rebel against the government. Thirdly, the environment that created Daesh in the first place is still there in Iraq today. You still have a sectarian government, you still have marginalization of large sections of the population, and you still have a government hell-bent that's still stuck in corruption. I'm not saying that the Prime Minister doesn't want to do anything, but the problem is, even if the Prime Minister wanted to do something, it just seems that you don't know where to start. If you want to rebuild Iraq, hurts me to say it, but you need to start in the southeast and you need to start in the south, where it's much more easier to organize.
Well, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio, Sami.
Thanks.